All right. This week we feature someone with over 45 years experience in astrology. He also helps others in clearing negative entities and energies, helping to bring balance back into people's lives, bringing ancient wisdom to current days. I'd like to welcome astrologer Jeff Harman to the show. How you doing, Jeff?
Doing real good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for taking the time out to be with us tonight.
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely.
So I see here that 45 years experience. That's quite a long time in
Yeah,
understanding.
I'm
Uh,
dating myself here.
but that's that astrology is something that you really, I mean, it takes lots of years, right, to
Oh
really.
yeah, it really does. And if anyone's honest, they'll never figure it all out. It's really the code of the angels is what I like to call it. Um, Clearly, yeah. I mean, and I've been blessed to study so many different disciplines of it. Oftentimes people hear about astrology and they say, "Oh, I know, I'm a Pisces, I'm an Aries, I'm a Libra," and I always like to say, "Well, actually, my opinion is you're not. You're a soul having a physical experience, and the Earth." Is really, I think the ancient Vedic astrologers, a lot of people have heard of Vedic astrology, and a guy that used to be a friend of mine, Chakrapani Ual, who lived, he was from India and he lived in Santa Monica. I was just looking at a picture with him this morning. He's the guy who coined the phrase Vedic astrology. And that kind of came about in the late 70s, maybe mid 70s. And it's named after the Vedic times or the Vedic scriptures, but really what it is it's called Jyotisha. In fact, here I'll show you. You and I were talking just before the show. I was going to get into a little bit of the screen sharing. One of the things that I like to show is, let me get over here to my Windows. I'm running a Mac with Windows, and one of the coolest things about Vedic astrology, a lot of people have heard of that, but it's really not Vedic astrology. Its true name is actually called Jyotish. And you can see here, they call it the science of the light of the soul. And what I love about the quote unquote Vedic or Jyotish astrology is it really departs from the modern Western theology of, oh, you're a Pisces, you're an Aries, and all these sun sign things, which have sold a lot of books over the last 100 years, particularly some of the Linda Goodman stuff. And almost anyone you speak to probably knows their sun sign. Like, I'll bet you know yours, don't you?
Yeah, I'm a Leo.
Yeah. See, but what's interesting about Vedic astrology, it uses a system known as the sidereal zodiac. See, sidereal is just another way of saying it's the outer zodiac. See, it was known for millennia that our solar system, of course, this is the sun all the way out to Pluto. Our solar system is what we call the tropical zodiac. It's based on the equinoxes and the solstices. Of course, the spring and fall equinox, summer and winter solstice. And of course, it sets our seasons very, very accurately. So that in Western astrology is called the tropical zodiac. And most people's sun signs are going to be quoted in that because most people aren't using what we call sidereal. And that is they take into account our solar system goes around a central sun about every 25,700 and something odd years. And no one really knows, but it's about that. And the two zodiacs were joined somewhere between the 2nd and 5th century. I think it was somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd century, but no one really knows. There's no 7-Eleven or, Wayside out there in space that says you've just crossed into Pisces and you've just crossed into Aquarius. And a lot of astrologers today are running around saying we're in the Aquarian age, it's love and light and everything's going to be great. And I wish they were right, but I kind of think that the Hebrew calendar might be when we truly, when it runs out, when it hits 6,000, that's when we probably will hit the Aquarian quote unquote age, when our solar system, the whole solar system ingresses into Aquarius. They say we're doing just short of 500 million miles an hour around this central sun, so fast that we're spiraling. So that's what I like about Vedic astrology is it uses the sidereal. And you can actually see here that the etheric energy of the spirit, the psyche, and the soul leave death to rebirth. And the Vedic astrologers really, particularly, there's many branches. There's Nadi astrology, which is the Nadi palm leaves, and a whole branch of astrology that I absolutely adore. It is the best astrology I've run into in terms of really elucidating that we are souls having a physical experience. And then there's what most Vedic astrologers use, which is Parashara, or after Maharishi Parashara, and Maharishi Jaimini. But the older one seems to be that one, Nadi. And it really says that the earth is a place where our spirit manifests into an embryo inside mom's womb. And if you were unlucky and became a test tube baby, I guess then that was the way it was. But most of us came out of mom, and we then have this physical experience for the duration of life. And they don't call death death; they call it the end of karma. Isn't that interesting? End of karma.
That is interesting. And is this something that's kind of gotten lost over the years? I mean, is this
clearly? I would say it's being regrouped. There are several people in India right now that I'm studying the works of. And I was in contact. I had a teacher many, many years ago who had done astrology for the Rothschilds in London and many others. He's very astute. And he literally said that he would look at a chart. And for anyone who's familiar watching this, this is called the Southern Indian chart. Whereas you'll see many other charts, these are the Northern Indian charts. So they just look different. You know, you can see this has like diamonds and it's a square. And of course, the other one is the what we call little linear squares going around. That's the Southern Indian chart. And he would look at those and he would say, oh, this person's going to get married here. They'll have this here. They might get sick here, but they'll die here. And I go, well, how did you do that? And he basically was looking at the planet Saturn for karma and the planet Jupiter for the soul. See, if you look at this diagram, Jupiter is the crescent of the moon over the cross. See, all the planets, glyphs, come from the circle, which is the never-ending creational forces in this world, which the dot in the middle could be like in the God, and the circle could be the never-ending creational forces. Everything starts out as a beginning, it grows, it matures, it atrophies, and it dies. So that's very much how you could say the way of this planet is looked at: growth, or you could say birth, growth, maturity, and death. And the moon is the crucible. And of course, the cross of matter, which is the earth. Here's another way to maybe look at this in a more interesting way. If you look at many people are familiar with the tree of life, and this kind of shows it even better. The circle is where our heart is, in the heart chakra. So the father could be likened to the seed, and the seed goes where? In mom's womb, it nurtures, and then it comes out between her feet on the four elements. Well, all of the rest of the glyphs of the planets come from the circle, the crescent, and the cross. Look at Jupiter is the crescents, scooping up the divine energy and concretizing it to the cross. And Saturn is exactly the opposite. Look at that. Saturn has the cross up above with the crescent underneath it. So there's a lot more going on here than Pisces loves Aries, or, you know, Gemini loves, you know, Taurus. All this stuff we hear, this, what I call love, light, and cluelessness. It's fine and it works, and it certainly has enamored people for a while. But the older astrology is so much more, you could almost say, scientific, because they say, notice the moon's nodes. See, if you look at, this is where eclipses happen. Everybody knows about eclipses, right? And when the sun and the moon and the earth align, you will get a solar eclipse. When the sun and the earth align, you'll get a lunar eclipse, right? So lunar eclipses can only happen on a full moon. And of course, on a new moon, we get the solar eclipse. Well, that only happens when the orbital plane of the earth lines up with the orbital plane of the moon and the sun. That's known as a fancy term called the ecliptic. And of course, why would they call it that? Well, it's where the eclipses happen. And the so-called obliquity of the Earth is the distance between where the Earth's orbit should be. The Earth orbits at about a 23-degree, 44-minute angle, and that's put out by NASA, not me or any astrologers. This is science. So that's why we have seasons. As we go around the sun appears to go south in the winter, gets cold, gets north in the winter, gets real hot. So, and of course, if you live in the southern hemisphere, it'll reverse for you. But when those all align up, the sun, moon, and the earth, we get the eclipse. Well, the north node is known as the wide point of perception of reality. And that's why in Vedic astrology, they call it Kala Purusha, which is a strange word that means time. It means our perception of reality of the physical world, where the south node is a tight focal point where karma gets liberated. That's why they call it Ketu, the tail. It's also known as the head and the tail of the dragon in Western astrology. And it's right, because it serpentines around the earth. And this is known by the Egyptians, by the Chaldeans, many ancient cultures. And when the south node meets the planet of karma called Saturn, and the north node meets Jupiter in your birth chart, you're likely to exit the physical plane known as death, whereas the Vedic astrologers call it the end of karma. So it's kind of cool.
That's really in depth, man.
Yeah.
That's real. So what first got you into astrology and like what you're currently doing? Kind of what put you on this path?
My mother. In the 70s, I was driving. I grew up in northern Wisconsin. It was like Dukes of Hazzard up there. Everybody was, ripping around. And I was driving at the time, and my mother had said to me, Jeffrey, that girl's going to be really this way. And I'd go, oh, okay, that's mother's intuition. And then she'd do it again on someone else, and she would be just spot on. I'm going, what are you doing here? And she goes, well, I've got their chart. And I said, what do you mean you got their chart? And she says, well, I have their astrology chart. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I said, does that stuff really work? I said, I've heard all the smart aleck comments like, well, the doctor in the delivery room has more gravity than Saturn. Well, they're probably right. The doctor might have more gravity than Saturn. But she said, why don't you check it out before you debunk it? And I did. And I have to say, it really caught me. And by probably the mid to late 70s, like 77, 78, we were really into it. We thought we were cool. We had the first computers, the Commodore 64 and then the Commodore 128, the floppy disk that had 5K on it. And it was a lot of fun. So, but we were actually doing charts by hand back then. And actually, believe it or not, I was doing charts by hand in Vedic astrology until probably the late 90s. I don't think it was about anything substantial came in until about 1997 or 98. And I was actually studying with Astrologer at the time, or several. And we would always do, charts by hand. And he was very spiritual. He would do mantras before he'd do the chart. And I came in with the first Vedic astrology program from a computer. And he says, oh my God, he goes, that's fast. And he says, I want a copy. I said, no. You told me to always cast chart by hand. And he goes, no, I want a copy. I said, yes, you do, because computers are fast. So that's how I got into it. And I have to say, all through the 80s, I had a recording studio, and I was always doing things with commercials and what have you. And it was a lot of fun. And I was always doing astrology to see who would, what their charts were like. And, here, this was my studio, if I can find the doggone thing. Where is it here? Yeah, here it is. This was the recording studio I had. It was a lot of fun. Oh, wow. That was actually the multi-track recorder that John Lennon's son, had cut much too late for goodbye on. I bought that from Phil Ramone in New York. That was kind of cool. And so we did all kinds of commercials and stuff. And I would always sit back here at the producer's desk, be doing charts. I'd want to know, why is this guy a Berkeley College of graduate, school graduate in music, arranging music. And the next guy coming in, had a bone through his nose, was in a punk rock band. So it was a lot of fun to observe the diversity of humanity. using astrology. And by the way, that's my mother. She was really into animals. You can see she was, we used to catch deer. Yeah. But the deer, the mothers would get hit by cars. And then I would hear the little does out in the woods braying at night or the field. And I would scoop them up and bring them home and we'd raise them. And then, they'd come in our house and eat cookies out of our mouth. And my mom just loved them. That was Herbie. So we had all kinds of deer. Here was another one, Tina. This was not to get into deers too much, but she was awesome. The deer hunters shot her full of arrows, even though we had a collar and spray painted her. So we healed her back up in the garage. That's why she's in the hay bales.
That's wild.
But that was cool. Yeah. My mom was really the influence that brought me here. And, to where I'm at. And I have to say, it's been a really fun journey. It's really interesting to see how free will and, people express their charts in a very interesting way. It's very, very fascinating.
So, and in this process of you trying to debunk, as your mom had asked.
Yeah, I became a staunch advocate.
And you realized that you had found proof, right?
Well, it certainly, proof is a tough thing to come up with in anything 100%,
right?
Though it can happen. But I would say, yeah, it's stunning. It's stunning. I've just lost a few friends to various different cancers or what have you. And in fact, speaking of Chakrapani, I only mentioned Chakrapani because he was very well respected. He was kind of known as the father of Vedic astrology. Mm-hmm. And he came over here kind of like Paramahansa Yogananda did, and in the 40s, and then of course later V.B. Raman. So this is what I call the Yogi Invasion. The yogis from India invaded America, and they brought a lot of this Eastern wisdom and knowledge with them. And again, when you look at some of the things they talk about, the Upanishads, these are like sacred texts in India, where they actually call planets graha. That's the Sanskrit word for planet, and graha actually means seizer or grasper of the aura, which is very fascinating when you think about that, because I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This may truly be the matrix of the soul. And it certainly seems to be. And that's what's always stunned me, was the accuracy of the influences of these energies. It was just stunning.
Right. The importance of, I guess, or some of the benefits of people understanding their astrological chart.
Well, I would say to that, it's energy. A point in case here, I had my son not too long ago, and I run into this with a lot of clients. I can never give medical advice, but Ayurvedic astrology is a stunning type of astrology. There's many types of astrology. You have your birth chart, which is basically analyzing your own birth chart. And then you have location astrology, which is stunning. I love location astrology. Location astrology, I do so much of that for people lately. And what that is it's literally taking your birth chart and extrapolating. I was just doing somebody in India earlier, but extrapolating it across the globe, whether it be the United States. It is. And you will have a different set of energies than anyone else. You have your own personal ley lines, and you also have, notice at the upper thing here, of course, this is the United States chart, but you have what we call the birth chart, which is known as natal. And then you have what we call transits and various progressions. And it's quite fascinating because you can actually look at animations of what's going on for a particular person or entity at a person, at their life. And you can see here, I'm animating transits up here. So this is another really fascinating type of astrology. The other type is the one known as, and probably the one I use the most, interrogation astrology. Interrogation is the word that many of the older astrologers from Egypt and Chaldea in the Middle Ages called it. It later got transformed into the one everybody parrots now, which is called horary, which I hate that word. Horary sounds like it's got hair on it or something, but It's a Latinized term for interrogation. And then in India, they refer to it as prashna. So horary and interrogation, or prashna, if you will, is all about asking questions. It's not your birth chart. It's literally casting a chart for the moment in time you want to know something. And it's probably one of the most stunning types of astrology, because that one will raise the skeptical eyes of the critics the most. It's like, well, how could you possibly just cast a chart for the moment I'm thinking about something and have it give any answers? Well, it's divinational, and it's stunning. I've seen it with court cases. I've seen it with missing people, lost items, business deals, health. Like I had a friend of mine not long ago said, his dear friend was in the hospital with emphysema, very sick. And he asked me, he said, do you think you'll make it through the night? And I said, according to this chart, no. And he didn't. And I said, he'll be lucky if he does. And again, this was with all the, forces of the medical care industry. And yet the chart was right. And, we see this all the time. So interrogation astrology, or as many people know it, horary, is an amazing tool. I use it literally in every reading I do because I'm always getting this. Well, do you think he's playing around on me? Or, will my boss fire me? Or is it in my best interest to leave here and move somewhere else? Especially I'm getting that a lot right now with the current state of the political climate. And I always say to us Americans, we have it a lot better here than what I'm hearing in many other countries. I'm speaking to people in Europe and Greece and Japan and Australia and many other places that are really having a quite an interesting time with this whole COVID issue. So I'm getting a lot of questions. So that's one type of astrology. The other one is electional astrology. People say, well, what is that? Electional astrology is picking an auspicious time to get married, to go have surgery if it's elective. Obviously, if you got to have surgery, you got to have surgery. But I get a lot of folks who say, well, geez, I'm going to have cataract surgery. I'm going to have some type of, cosmetic surgery. And I'm like, well, great. Then get from your doctor when he's available, or she, and we'll pick the best time out of all of it. And then there's, of course, the medical astrology, which is analyzing cycles as to when you might find, your health needs more support than not. And that's a really interesting one, which I've mentioned already. So there's a number of ways you can use interrogation and the birth chart on that. So astrology can be used a lot of ways. One of the most important ways is cycles. I'm astounded at, throughout my life, every 2 years, Mars will go around a person's birth chart. And Mars is what? Mars is your energy. It is the sense of ego, the drive, the body. So where Mars is really puts an energy onto where you're at. Is it in the 10th house? Well, you'll be doing career. If it's in the ascendant, you'll be probably working out again, or in some way extroverted. And, the sun, where that is every month, is very important. The big guys, though, are Saturn and Jupiter, and where these 18-year cycles of the nodes are. And in the Western astrology, which I like as well, I look at Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. They have powerful effects on people. So in all of us, everybody is going to get a Saturn return at least twice in their life. Many people will live to have the third one. The first Saturn return will happen to every individual somewhere between 28 and 29. Give or take. That's the end of what I call Act One. I always say life is a 3-act stage play. Act One is from birth to the first Saturn return. Then you begin Act Two till about 58 or 59. See, Saturn takes about 28 and a half years to go around the chart, 29 years, something like that. And then you end Act Two at 58 or 59, and then you're in Act Three. And if you live to 86 or 87-ish, 85 to 87, you're going to hit your next Saturn return, which I call the end of Act Three. And after that, it's the reprise and the exit music, depending, most people don't live much past, their
right,
late 80s and 90s or 100. And if they do, God bless them, that's why I call it the exit music. So, It's kind of like Florida, God's waiting room once you hit past 85. So, anyways, that's kind of some of the values you can get out of astrology. It's really fascinating. When I do readings, again, you can see on the screen here. It's so nice to have the power to see what one is talking about. It's very, very powerful. Yeah. So you can see this is the United States chart right here, which we would cast that for the signing of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th of 1776. It's rumored by a man named Ebenezer Sibley, who was apparently a Mason who was purported to have recorded the time. He said the bells started ringing somewhere around 5:10 p.m. So that's why it says 1710. So that's the chart. And of course, that was in Pennsylvania. And there you have it. So that's the chart of the United States.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. So can you talk about maybe the importance of karma and the different types of karma?
Yeah, that's fun stuff. There's a whole divisions of karma in Vedic astrology. And what's so fascinating about that is, notice this diagram I showed before here. This big, thick dashed line could be the demarcation between what maybe modern psychiatry or psychology might call the conscious mind below and the so-called subconscious mind is above. Well, notice Saturn operates just above that. A better diagram actually might be this one, which is the same diagram with a human, figure and aura here. And you can see Saturn in the karmic philosophies of the Vedantic principles was the purpose of our incarnation. And notice it's the cross above the crescent of the moon. It almost acts like a capacitor in electricity. It stores, you could say, previously created energies. In fact, Dr. Emoto, who many people have heard of, he's the Japanese scientist who wrote the book,
Yes,
Messages in Water, and of course, several others. I had the opportunity to meet him. He was really a fascinating man. He never called them this, but in Vedic astrology, they call them samskaras. In the Western mysticism schools, they call them elementals, thought form elementals particularly. And what's really interesting about that is they talk how literally every breath we take is just like the police song. We are clearing karmas. And if you look at the chakras, also rule the 7 planets. Mars is the crown chakra where the auric energy comes in. Jupiter is the third eye. We all look at people when we look at them, but we never really realize that, yeah, we're seeing with the eyes, but we're projecting with the third eye chakra. That's where the evil eye comes from. If you get around people who are, in certain circles, they'll say, "Oh, you gave me the evil eye." Well, you're projecting anger at someone. And what's interesting is Dr. Emoto actually took water, as many people will know, and froze it in petri discs, and then analyzed it under a microscope and took pictures. And he proved, I think, beyond a reasonable doubt, that positive sacred thoughts have sacred geometrical shapes. These are only 2 pictures. And negativity, fear, anger, worry, and discord always came out looking like gobbledygook. Well, now back to karma. The philosophy behind Vedic, or you could say Nadi astrology in particular, is that Saturn is you could say, the position of Saturn when you were born is indicative of the karmic energy you have created either in past lives. And some people will say, well, wait a minute, I was never born in before. Well, I would say then you're certainly possibly purifying and rectifying karmas that you're sharing with your soul root of your you could say karmic ancestry, which might be quite a bit different than genetics. We all jump on ancestry.com and what have you and find out who, grandpa came over on the Mayflower or whatever. And that's all great. But this is karmic connection to the soul root, which is significantly different than maybe a genetic connection. So that's the philosophy. We are born to purify and rectify certain karmas. And what's interesting is the conscious mind starts to form in the womb. Now, if you go back here to this other diagram, this gets into a whole theology that actually is very ancient Chaldean, Hebrew, Egyptian, particularly Hebrew. A lot of modern things, it's the Kabbalah, and you have to say that with a thunderous voice because that's how the Kabbalah has become. It's become like pop culture in some ways. Not that I dislike some of the stuff in the Kabbalah. I think it's wonderful. But on the other hand, it's become a bit like a religion. And if you really go back further, it's just spiritual sacred knowledge. One of the oldest texts, I believe, in existence in the West is something known as the Sefer Ratziel. And that is named after the archangel Ratziel. Ratziel, in fact, if you look here, you can actually see the archangel Ratziel is on what we call Chokmah, which is the wisdom. And if you look at, Archangel Ratziel, you can actually see the archangelic being Ratziel. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? That's the angel of wisdom that God was believed to have sent to Adam when Adam and Eve fell out of the garden. And notice that also kind of is the same place as the human spirit. So back to karmas, they say there's karmas you're creating in this lifetime, which are called various different names. I could rattle them off for you and impress you, but it's not that important. There's Sanchita, there's Prarabdha, there's all these different divisions of karma. There's like 4 or 5 divisions of karma in Vedic astrology. And the purpose is some we're creating, some we're sharing, some we have to do. There are karmas coming to fruition. Well, what's interesting is in Vedic astrology, the position of Saturn in your birth chart by transit and progression shows when these karmas are coming due, and we're all going to get them. And the moon's north and south nodes also have a huge effect in Nadi and Vedic astrology as to when those release. Like I said, when the focal point of the south node reaches your Saturn and the focal point of your north node reaches your Jupiter, which is your soul force energy, and Mars has to be involved too. The very special conditions, you will exit the body and so will I. It's fairly safe to say that you could probably say nobody's going to live forever, and but not in the body, at least. But the soul is believed to be indestructible. So is the spirit, and it moves on after its sojourn, or you could say life on earth, and reabsorbs into the collective incarnations. This is a cool diagram here. This diagram is one of my favorites to show because whatever our concept of God is, and everyone has one, some people you talk to, it's Jesus, other people it's Buddha, it's Allah, it's whatever, or the guy in the sky with the beard, or some androgynous thing. But human minds we cannot grasp the infinity, or you could say true divinity, or God, if you will, because it's beyond our 3-dimensional 5-sense grasps. And what's interesting is they say God is above all the creation, and your soul might be created right here. This is called the worlds of Absolute, which is an Aramaic or Hebrew word, which means the divine creation of souls or emanation of souls. And these are the angels that are believed to rule this very sacred and high dimension. And they say there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions here. And there's no astrology. There's no Pisces, no Aries, no, Geminis and Tauruses or other sun signs. and there's no galaxies here. It's very sacred. You could call this maybe the upper heavens. And then the next worlds down, Braya, is, they say, where the waters of creation start to coalesce more densely, and the angels ruling that are dominance, virtues, and powers. And again, 49 dimensions, 49 subdimensions, very high, very divine stuff. It's way down here. Many people who study Kabbalah will have heard of a text called the Sefer Yetzirah, which means the worlds of formation. That's what Yetzirah means. It's where dense matter begins to coalesce into all the stuff science is rightly studying. You've got all the amino acids and the gas clouds and the rotating galaxies, and the universe is vast, far beyond what any of us can comprehend. Certainly far beyond what I can comprehend. And they say there may be 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions in each one. I don't know about you, bud, but that's a mind bender. That's like the ultimate Twilight Zone episode. And notice what we see: the familiar archangels, angels, intelligences, and spirits. And then beneath that, we have the worlds of Asaya. By the way, our Milky Way could be maybe somewhere down here, and our little solar system on the speck edge of it is here. And the last worlds is the worlds of Asaya, which is another synonym for action in Aramaic and Hebrew, or astral planes. This is where they say the eighth sphere, which is the universe or fixed stars, bleeds down into the mixture of the matrix of the solar system. Then there's the astral worlds, also known as the pouch of the slingshot, where people who pass away, we call them dead people, but disincarnate souls, end up in various different dimensions. And of course, we see over here Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan. And, you know, in the Western religions, we usually got some guy with a suit and tie and a microphone telling us about the devil, but it's maybe a little bit more than that. It's some very sophisticated and very evil Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan. And there's legions beneath that. And interestingly enough, it kind of supports exactly the Western, you know, fall of the angels and fall of man, if you will, or humans. And the same stories are in the Vedantic as well, just with different names. So, and then here we are dropping into these meat suits called bodies, and we grow through them and mature. And the karmas that we collect in this lifetime, both good and ill, are indicated in the Jyotish astrology quite elegantly. And the conscious mind that we have is really what more would be maybe accurately called the present personality. And that's why our perception of reality is so shaped by our environment and other things that psychology and psychiatry cannot explain. And there's where karma enters in. It's very interesting stuff.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, you know, some of the things you've done with clients as far as, you know, clearings and cleansings and stuff like that, and how you've been able to help people?
Yeah. Well, that's an area you have to approach very cautiously and very, you could say, with a lot of humility, because most of the time, like I've seen properties, I've done a lot of property clearings and clearings on people as well. And I've also had clearings done on me. And we all can use that. We all are kind of like a ship passing through the sea. We're going to collect barnacles. Some of those might be elementals that we're like massive tuning forks, or very complex tuning forks. And as we, you could say, progress through life, it's really good to get washed off and cleaned. So I often like to assess what is wrong by using interrogation astrology. Why? Like someone will say, well, you know, I had one situation a number of years ago. It was actually, believe it or not, someone in the judicial system. I can't really mention who, but it was a judge. And the person said, you can't tell anybody who I am or where I'm at. And I said, of course not. And I'm always amazed at how many people in high places really believe in spiritual and occult things. And they really do, even though they're in very linear left brain businesses or areas of society. And in this particular case, had a situation where he said, our house is possessed. He said, my wife and the maids were telling me that there was something really strange going on. They kept hearing this howling and things were moving. And he said, I thought they were crazy. And he said, and then I heard it myself several times. And he said, my God, he said, this is so crazy. We've had I think they had 6 or 7 maids quit because they said, we're getting out of here. So I said, okay, I'll check it out. I looked at it using interrogation astrology, and the chart. And again, this wasn't his or his wife's or anyone else's birth chart. This was casting a chart at the moment in time, called, again, interrogation or prashna. And if you like the Latin word, you can call it horary. And it's literally casting a chart based on the consciousness at that time of what someone wants to know. So the Eastern horizon always becomes the querent, and the rulers and all that. So it's very complex, but once you get it, the home is the 4th house. And I clearly saw that there was possession here or something very strange going on. And I said to him and his wife, I said, well, you're going to need to let me in there to do a clearing. Usually I do remote clearings. I don't have to go there. And I do a lot of clearings, sometimes across the country or on the other side of the world. You can do it what we call by astral projection, just intending to be there. And I always find that when I clear something, I love to do it at a good time. Now, people might say, well, what does that mean? Well, that is in literally electional astrology. See, getting married at a good time, moving at a good time, buying a house, selling. I do a lot of real estate elections. So it's picking an auspicious time where you have the wind at your back, per se. And particularly in clearings, I love to have the moon separating from malefic planets and applying to benefics. The reason why, it fits the energy. It's almost like an alchemical way to get it right. So in this particular case, since he was a judge, he says, here, I'll sign a piece of paper. So you're, if anything ever happens, you're legally allowed to be here. So him and his wife and the kids, they went and got a hotel. And I was in there that night, and I found it was extremely intense. And I ended up finding it was a disincarnate soul who had been killed there many, many years prior. And I ended up doing research afterwards and found out that there was believed to be a brothel there. It's kind of interesting. And I got that this poor girl was pushed off of a hill. Who knows? Maybe she was pregnant or something. That's kind of what I got. Mm-hmm. And somebody wanted to get rid of her, which is horrible, and you hear about these horrible things all the time. And she was lost. And, there's no time, we all sit here and say, well, we've got to pay the bills here on the 1st. Well, we do. So we're all rooted down in this perception of reality called time. That's the illusion of the physical world, which is really indicative, or you could say, of the north node of the moon. And what's interesting is she didn't know that she was dead. And I had to actually force her out of there by using some very special prayers and rituals. And I actually think I got her to see the light because it cleared up. And, a lot of people say, well, geez, you must be a wizard or something. No, not at all. Anyone can learn this stuff. There was a wonderful set of doctors who are now all deceased. One of my favorite was Dr. Carl Wickland. He was a psychiatrist who didn't believe in any of this stuff. He was kind of like me. He says, well, I don't believe in this stuff. And then got exposed to it as a medical doctor and psychiatrist. Anyone ever wants to read a fascinating book, I always love to recommend this book. The publisher ought to thank me. I've probably sold a few for him. But one of my favorite books to recommend here, I'll just show this to you. It's a book called 30 Years Among the Dead. And it was written, here, I'll just show you. We'll just go on Amazon. I call it Amazon because it's a nice way to at least show things. But 30 Years Among the Dead was written by Dr. Carl Wickland. Here it is right there. That's the book right there. And what's in there, it is again there too. So looks like they got a hardcover version. Wow, that's nice. I want to get that one. Anyways, there it is. So what I like, oh no, it's a short paperback, $9.99. He basically, well, it looks like you can't get it. Oh yeah, you can get it in hardcover. He was a psychiatrist who didn't believe in anything. In fact, a lot of people may have heard of shock therapy treatment, that nice stuff they do when they zap you and they say you've got schizophrenia. He was Mr. Lobotomy, Mr. Schizophrenia cure with shock therapy treatment. He actually was in charge of the Los Angeles County Mental Institution during the birth of Hollywood from, I think it's early 20s. It might have been 1918, but it was about the early 20s through the, I think, almost 50s, because he lived a long time. And he did not believe in any of spirituality, disincarnate souls, ghosts, all that stuff. And he ended up in charge of the mental institution here in Los Angeles. And then he went to a party, met a beautiful woman, and fell in love, became smitten with her, and married her. And guess what she turns out to be? A psychic channel. I always love to tell the story, because this is where Dr. Jekyll meets, the polar opposite. And she, being very rational, he knew she wasn't crazy. He knew she had to be doing something real. So he undertook a scientific study to see whether or not she was delusional. Was she really channeling these beings, or was she delusional? And he did an astounding job at recording this. This is back again in the 20s. This is back in the time of Valentino and, or Will Rogers. This is the birth of Hollywood, Frank Capra. And right. Long story short, he had his wife take in someone who looked at him and said, "You're the one that's been shocking me with this lightning." And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And the person proceeded to explain a shock therapy treatment that went awry, and ended up explaining it in such grave detail. He says, "There's no way you couldn't have been there." He says, "How would you have known the table fell and this happened and all that?" And long story short, he got the guy to look down and say, "Are you wearing a wedding ring and a dress?" And of course, he's controlling his wife's body, and looked down and goes, "Oh my God." He goes, "What's going on here?" He said, "Well, apparently you're deceased, as we would call it. And maybe you're possessing my patient's body." And he got into dialogue. It's so fascinating to read the book because it's so well documented, case after case after case. That's why for 30 years, there's cases. That's why it's called 30 Years Among the Dead, is because for the next 30 years, he ended up, documenting all this stuff. Well, to end that story, he got the guy to, quote unquote, go into the light, if you will, kind of like what I was doing with the girl at that brothel, or that place that was a brothel and now was the people's home, and large mansion. And long story short, the patient at the mental institution completely cleared up, and Dr. Wickland ended up discharging her within a very short amount of time. No meds, no more shock therapy. Cleared up. So this set him on a course. Now, why am I bringing all this up? Is because we often find people or places, properties too. A lot of times you'll get people haunting properties that used to live there. This is my place. What are you guys doing here? And people think this is bunk, but it's actually quite stunning how much people hang around. And it usually happens due to lack of awareness.
What do you believe it is, though? Since there is no real such thing as time, it's clearly not them from the past. Is it
No.
them? Is it them at one point, I guess, like maybe bleeding through from another dimension, or what do you think spirit is?
Well, I think spirit is localized consciousness at varying levels. You take people today have been exposed to a lot more than people in the past. You look at where the world's gone in the past, even 30, 40 years, it's stunning. People with the internet and shows like you're doing are getting exposed to this kind of stuff on a regular basis. This has become commonplace. Whereas, I remember when I was growing up, my God, and my father and my grandfather, this was, you were lucky, if you read 3 books in your lifetime about this stuff. You're lucky if you read 1. And, we didn't have the communications and the internet and the knowledge that we have on the internet and so many things. And, I think it's changing consciousness, and consciousness seems to be what we would call that lower conscious mind. Now, in Hebrew, they actually have a specific name for it. It's called the Nephesh. Nephesh is a strange word for the lower conscious mind. It's the, you could say, perception of reality. Like, you are who you are, I'm who I am, and everyone else is who they are. And we all fight to keep our physical world intact, pay our bills, pay our taxes, do whatever we got to do, right? Maintain our vehicles, our cars, our bodies, all that. But it's not us. It's not us. And science has proved that. Dr. Emoto certainly proved that spirit can be concretized, or elemental energy can be concretized in water. That's what he was doing when he froze those dishes. The Tibetan lamas would take many of their disciples up into the mountains, and they would train them to focus the third eye chakra by building these little castles, if you will. And you can see these sand formations, and they would literally build an elemental, and then they would come down into the villages, and people would see this, they would feel it. This is why many actors and actresses have such a presence, and many of them don't, especially today. The older ones really did. I mean, when you looked at the persona, I mean, you take people like Jimmy Stewart, Robert Mitchum, so many great actors like Ingrid Bergman, and these people were bigger than life, and that shows up on a camera. It shows up in various different places when we meet people. They have what we call a psychic power. Well, this is all cultivated by a lot of what we believe. Belief is such a powerful thing in free will. Many of your positive thinkers talk about that. Well, developing goal setting and drive. And I think one of the strongest energies in the world is emotion, whether it's drive to get somewhere. I mean, when you look at most successful people, they have an insatiable drive to achieve. They'll do anything to achieve. Sometimes to their detriment. They'll do anything to anybody to achieve. And there's other people who have a healthier drive to achieve. And then there's people who are despondent. We see them sleeping under the bridge every day, or when they're doing drugs and alcohol, which is probably one of the best ways to destroy your aura. I always tell people it's like taking a flamethrower to your aura. I was around so much of that in the studio business. I was so glad to get out of it, because musicians tend to dabble in that area, and it's really not good, and it's very destructive, not only physically but to your psyche. Dr. Carl Wicklund talked a lot about that, how many people who died from drug overdoses, alcohol overdoses, came back through his wife's body and warned people, stay away from this stuff, stay away from morphine, stay away from heroin, stay away from alcohol, because it took us a long time on the astral plane to realize that and get clean, so to speak, from the elementals. So when you ask what is consciousness and what are we, I mean, there's overwhelming proof. How many people have had NDE experiences and they come back to talk about it, Yeah. So astrology is really the interaction. It's the interactive consciousness that's going on, I believe, on the purification of the soul. And there's free will, because I see people who are really inherently evil. I've seen them do some really bad, nasty things to people, whether it be in lawsuits or violence, etc. And I've had the great blessing of looking at some of these charts with psychiatrists in the prison system, and in various other areas of life. And it's really fascinating to see in Vedic astrology how this stuff shows up. And I've also looked at really amazing sacred people, or just good people, and it shows up in the chart, because it's a reflection of their consciousness and their karma.
Very good. Now, real quick, you had a UFO experience?
I've had many.
Interesting. Please tell.
Yeah. Well, which one? The funnest one to tell about was in 1970, I think it was 75 or 76. I had this motorcycle, and I was at a girlfriend's house. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm coming home, and I'm way up in the north woods of Wisconsin, very close to the upper peninsula of Michigan, where many people are familiar with. And about 30 miles south. And I was on this lake because there's a series of lakes up there in these areas, and it's all woods, very narrow roads. I was going down this road, and I caught out of my mirror this yellow flash, and I look up over the woods, and I see this kind of triangular shaped craft. I thought, wow, that's really weird. So I take off, and I'd seen a lot of that stuff growing up there for so many years. I used to track them, actually. And my parents thought I was nuts until I brought my dad down. I said, look, do you see that in the telescope? He says, yes, I do. I said, now, am I nuts? He says, no, you're not nuts. That's really there. So it was something just like that. And I remember I think my fourth gear was blown. So I only had 3 gears on the bike. And I was going along, and I came to our lake, which, by the way, was called Lost Lake, and appropriate name. And I was coming down and going onto the drive that went around the Lakeshore Drive, and my bike completely dies, right? So I pull over, and I thought, okay, it's an old bike, it's an old Triumph piece of junk. And I took a lighter, because I smoked at the time, I had a Bic lighter. Every teenager smokes, right? So I took a Bic lighter, and I looked, and no blowing fuses. And bike's completely dead. So I say, okay, I know a guy about a quarter mile up the road. I'll push it up there and see if I can just push the bike next to him so nobody steals it. And he heard me outside. I was just going to walk home. He heard me outside, and he comes out, and he says, hey, is that you, Jeff? I said, yeah. He says, because I knew his son. And long story short, he's the one who saw it. He says, what's that up over there? I said, wow, that's interesting. I said, that I just saw over on Big St. Germain Lake here just a little while ago. And I said, I wonder if that's what killed this bike. And so, he goes in the garage, gets a wrench. We come out, we arc the batteries, completely dead, like dead. And what was so interesting, he said, well, let me give you a ride home. So he gives me a ride home. The next morning, and you could feel it was really a heavy energy. The next morning, I came back with a pickup truck. My mother gave me a ride over, and I was, going to load it up in there. And I figured, well, let me just try it. And boom, starts right up, electric start. So it was amazing. It just ran perfectly. And I know that knocked it out. I used to see things all the time up there, like animals would be scattering when I'd see a craft go down into the woods somewhere. And, you always see deer, you see raccoon, you see nocturnal animals, but you don't see squirrels. Squirrels typically are not out late at night. They go to bed by early, and other animals. And I noticed very strange behavior when the stuff would happen. Another time I was on a snowmobile, dead of winter, and me and my friends were we stopped and we're resting, and we're laying on our backs with our feet up on the handlebars. And we saw these huge amounts of lights going up and down. I mean, like hundreds of them. And I've seen, living in Tucson, Arizona, and here, I've seen stuff that is phenomenal. I was just at Fox Studios about 1.5 years ago with my wife at a premiere. And we were talking to somebody about UFOs, just like you and I are. And this guy overhears me, and he comes up, he goes, were you just talking about UFOs out in Malibu? I said, yeah. He goes, I want to tell you something. He said, I'm a Marine. And he said, we have a research team. We've been tracking UFOs underneath Zuma Beach. And for anybody who wants to know, Zuma Beach is right off it's where I Dream of Jeannie and Gilligan's Island was filmed. Some of the scenes anyhow. It's right there. It's right there. If you look at where Los Angeles is, it's just slightly north of the city of Malibu, right there. See, there's Santa Monica Bay, and there's Palisades. Malibu's right there. So it's right there. They say there's this huge cavern underneath here, like huge. And these UFOs, they're tracking them with very sophisticated equipment. And they said they're coming out of that water at speeds we couldn't even think about doing. And they're going out of the atmosphere. He said the acceleration is beyond anything we could do. It's almost near instantaneous. And I've heard, I used to teach a class, and I had one student tell me that his father was an admiral. And I heard that this whole area is honeycombed, that the US Navy and military has been going under here with submarines, and they can take boats almost all the way to Salt Lake City. So there appears to be this honeycombed network of caverns under the whole West Coast. And
Wow.
there might be a hell of a lot of UFO activity in there as well as many other places. One thing's for sure, if they're smart enough to get here, they're a lot smarter than we are.
Why do you think they're here?
They may have been here forever from the evidence.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's fairly arrogant for us as a human race to think that, you know, when you look at the Milky Way alone, let's just forget about the entire universe, just the Milky Way galaxy alone has the probability of life on one of those planets quite high.
Right.
And then when you look at the universe and you look at now wormholes and parallel universes, the military has been said, and I believe it's probably true, that they've been playing around with Tesla technology and portals and time travel and all this stuff. Is it true? I believe it is.
Yeah. Wow.
There's no time. There's only our perception of reality. When you look at what is time, time is a day is the rotation of the earth on its axis. The sun is not rising and setting every day. It's only doing it to our perception of reality. Why? The sun's hanging right where it is. It's us rolling around. And yes, it's rising and setting from our perception of reality, but it's really not in a what we would call an astronomical, sense of astronomy. And what is a month? A month is the cycle of the moon around the earth. The moon has tremendous effects on the earth in terms of fluids, energies, and there's overwhelming data on it. And then you take a year is just a cycle around the sun. So if you were not on this planet and or not of the, you could say, lower physical constraints of this planet, and you were in an astral sense, what is time? They actually talk about in many ancient documents how when the moon is full on the earth, on the astral planes to souls, it's actually new. So it's reverse. If it's full here, it's new there. If it's new there, it's full here. So it's really interesting. And they talk about all these layers and how there's so many souls that are layered in all these astral dimensions. Some are looking to get out and some are looking to come in and some are trapped. Very, very interesting stuff. And can't make this stuff up. There's one of my favorite texts to support what I'm saying, in case anyone thinks I'm completely out of my mind. One of the texts is called the Share Hagilgam, which Sharar in Aramaic and Hebrew means gate, and Hagilgam means cycling or recirculating. And it's called the Gates of Reincarnation. Now, this is one text of many that speaks about how you and I and everyone else drawing breath is spirit here in these evolving genetic things called bodies that is purifying and rectifying the soul by every breath we take. And what's fascinating about that is when you look at, again, the chakras, we breathe through the nose and the mouth, and we bring past all the chakras, particularly the root chakra, when you intend it down. We are purifying and rectifying every breath we take. And of course, last breath is the completion of karma. And if you look in the Aramaic and Hebrew, they actually refer to spirit and breath as a term called Rosh. It's the forces that keep all this genetics that science is busy studying, you could say, alive. It's really interesting stuff, very complex.
What's your take on aliens? I mean, do you believe they are from another planet? Are they spiritual beings? Are they advanced spiritual beings? Are they us from the future? I've heard that, what's your thoughts?
Well, that you're cracking open a mighty complex topic there, because when you get into the whole point of aliens, I mean, an alien could be someone from Mexico that's not American. An alien could be an angel. Of course, we've got a few of those coming in right now, but and they're not just from Mexico either. But I think aliens, when we think about that, we're thinking about a gray in a spaceship or something like that. But there's some pretty interesting evidence by some really good researchers to support that there are many beings that have been on this planet forever, coexisting with us, either in this dimension or in other dimensions, morphing in and out. We've heard of the Sasquatch. That one always gets a lot of press. By the way, I actually really saw a Sasquatch. A lot of people say they have, but I actually did. This was again in the late 70s. I was walking up to a friend of mine's. Yeah, Wisconsin. I was walking up to a friend of mine's house, and it was right in the spring where it would melt a lot in March and April and then freeze at night because it would get quite cold up there at night. And I was walking along up this road. It was very dark. And I saw this huge guy. And this guy was big. I mean, of course, at that time, I was about 6'3.5", 6'3 3/4. And that dude made me look like I was 2 inches tall. I mean, he had to be 8 feet tall. He was huge, if at least. And he was probably about 30 yards in front of me, give or take. And the strangest thing was, he almost looked like he had a t-shirt or some kind of a tight-fitting garment on top. Big dude. And I couldn't make him out real clear. I couldn't see if he had a beard or not, because he did have long hair. And he ran, but he didn't look like, like a gorilla or Chewbacca or something from Star Wars. But he did really have a fast gait. And the only reason I caught it was because he crunched in the snow twice. And that's what made me look over. And I went, oh my God. So I stood there for a couple of seconds. I went, geez. I said, man, this guy's huge. He turned around and took off. And what was interesting is when he did, I could hardly hear anything. And he ran through the thickest brush I've ever seen. I don't think a deer could have gotten through there without breaking a twig, or at least me hearing it. And it was dead silent out at night. And I couldn't hear a thing, and he was gone. So I just stood there dumbfounded. I went up to my friend's house, and of course, down we came with our, my friend had his pickup truck with the searchlights, and, there they come, shotguns, they're all ready to go. So we come driving down, and we're shining everywhere looking, and we saw the tracks going in, and they did not look like a Sasquatch. It looked like he had big bunny boots or something on, or something like a boot. And it could have been just a really large guy who was homeless. I highly doubt that, but he certainly was moving fast. And we also heard from a friend later the next day that there was a couple of chickens missing out of his chicken coop. So interesting. Can't necessarily attribute it to him, but I don't think it was a fox.
Right.
So, interesting stuff. And I've seen that, again, more than once, but that was the closest I've ever seen. I've seen like images of large beings, but I've never seen anything that close ever. That was clearly the closest time we didn't see anything, and we couldn't find it wherever he went. So long gone. But back to aliens, I would say there are aliens of all kinds, and they're, when you look at angels and spirit manifest and grays and Nephilim and all these different things, the one of the more compelling books that is pretty good on this is the books of Enoch. And many people have heard of the Keys of Enoch. I don't know if I have a copy of that here, but there's some really good translations of the books of Enoch that are quite compelling, where this stuff has been around us forever. Even in the Bible, there's the term of Exodus. Exodus is also known in the Aramaic and Hebrew as the Shem HaMephorash. And this now gets into the whole realms of medieval magic and Masonic magic and all this stuff, even though no one wants to admit that. But it's known as the Goetia. And it's very dangerous stuff. I always tell folks, stay far away from that world, because there is many documents and grimoires that talk about summoning these spirits. And some of these could be perceived as aliens, because they certainly have and can take on any type of shape. So it's very dangerous stuff. And they're actually ruling each quintessence of the tropical zodiac as you go around. And they certainly seem to be a part of the karmic sword that works on us all for the purification or rectification. There's so many secrets to this stuff. The Psalms are full of these cryptographic allusions that are encrypted in ciphers in the Hebrew and in the Aramaic of the Psalms. Totally gets lost in Latin, totally gets lost in English. But the Aramaic and Hebrew, I'll tell you what, I've got a lot of that stuff. It's pretty amazing how much there is. So there might be that realm. And then I do think we really do have aliens that truly come here and come in and out of our reality. There's pretty overwhelming evidence to it. I actually had a chance once to see Area 51 at a distance. I was up in Nevada. A friend of mine has a gold claim up there, and they were using ranger tells and all kinds of equipment to determine whether or not there was gold in this place. And he hauled me up there and said, let's see what astrology can do. And I've actually worked with several people on treasure hunting, and the astrology has been amazingly accurate on that, whether we would or would not find it. And I told him, I said, you got gold here. But I said, it's really deep and it's going to cost, it's going to cost him a fortune to get it out, but could be worth it because it's really looking, like he's got a lot there. And in the process, I just climbed up to the top of the mountain to have a look-see, because it was kind of interesting terrain up there. It's very hot. And I got up to the top of the mountain, and I'm looking and I'm seeing this craft like floating and stop, and then floating and stop. And then it came in for a landing. And it looked like a big lake, Brett. And I howled down. I said, Mike, I said, well, what is that? He said, that's Area 51. I said, you gotta be kidding. So I sat up there watching this craft. There was only a few craft, and it was very strange. Most of them looked like planes, but a couple would just like stop. And it was too far for me to see. They were either stealth bombers or they were clearly alien craft, because they did not look like normal planes, I can tell you that. And again, the distance was too great for me, and I didn't have any optics with me like telescopes. But clearly, you could see there was some very interesting activity going on there. So I think the U.S. government's been long playing with them. There's my wife Camille actually wrote for UFO magazine with Bill Burns, and I was involved. I actually got hired by one of the directors of MUFON, which is Mutual UFO Network in Tucson, Arizona, to do a study.
On my show from MUFON.
Oh, cool. And I did a study. I've got a pamphlet about this thick. And we studied a lot of, well, of course, Skinwalker Ranch. Now they've got a TV show on it.
Right.
And I was studying some phenomena on that. I was also studying like Travis Walton, Barty and Betty Hill abductions. We were looking at their birth charts. We're also looking at what we call mundane astrology, which is when something happens, like 9/11 or COVID-19 or whatever. You can see a lot from that. And I've actually worked a lot with remote viewers. In fact, I just got hired by a remote viewing group just recently. I can't mention who they are, but where we look into, does celestial mechanical phenomenon, which you could just say astronomy, the rotation of the earth, the positions of the moon, and the various aspects of the heavens have any effect on the ability for a remote viewer or a psychic to have accuracy? And the answer is yes, clearly. I found that transits to people's birth charts not only affect our lives, but they certainly affect when you're doing work of that nature, particularly remote viewing. And this falls also into the category of UFO phenomena and aliens. We have found clearly the people either having the abductions have strong Saturn aspects. They will exhibit certain progressions when these things are happening, because a lot of people never have it at all. And other people do, and they have it frequently. So they may have come in to this lifetime with that propensity or ability to have these experiences much more than others. One of the guys that I had the blessings of meeting before he was killed, and I do believe he was killed, was Dr. John Mack. He was a psychiatrist. You ever heard of him?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
cool
go
guy.
ahead. Go ahead. Tell the.
So I was, again, thanks to my wife, Camille, we ended up in Malibu, up at one of the houses way up on the hill, up and overlooking the ocean. It was a beautiful place. And it was really cool. We went up there one night and Dr. Mack was there and we got to talk to him. And, Dr. Mack reminded me a lot of M. Scott Peck, who many people may know of, the man who wrote People of the Lie. And he also wrote a lot about UFO phenomena and met with the exorcist Malachi Martin, who was very famous. And both of these men clearly, from a purely left brain psychiatric viewpoint, really believed that UFO, or you could say alien abduction, was a real thing, that these people were not imagining it. Dr. Mack, I can't remember, I think at that time he was working with regression therapy. And he was a very interesting man, very, very smart individual, nice guy too. And clearly believed himself. He wasn't just playing psychiatrist. He literally believed that alien abduction or phenomena like that was a real thing. And I think that falls too into the spiritual realm, because we're friends with Barbara Lamb, and she's really a nice lady. I've known Barbara for years. And clearly Barbara is a regressionary therapist and a researcher, and a very good one at that. And I also knew Dr. Lear too. Dr. Lear was a medical doctor who literally was cutting implants out of people. And of course, Dr. Lear passed away. But, it's been an interesting journey to look at this kind of parallel world that's going on with our world. And the astrology certainly seems to indicate the times when these things are likely. Very, very interesting.
No, it goes back to astrology. That's interesting.
Well, it certainly is parallel to it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, experience is experience, but it's interesting to take the celestial mechanics and look at, does it have correlation? And the answer is yes.
Usually, yes.
Yeah. Almost always.
Well, it's been a fascinating discussion, Jeff. Where can we find the work that you're doing, and where can they get a hold of you if they need to?
Well, the best way is Jeff at jeffharman.com, HARMAN.com. Everyone wants to spell it O-N, but it's always best to email, because again, my wife Camille is wonderful at taking appointments and scheduling them. And I've always been, interestingly enough, moving in other directions in my life, and I never can, because I always find that I'm really busy with astrology, and I love it, because I also do film work, and I love audio and film and all that, and creative work. But I'm always kept here, and I always am kind of looking at it like a blessing, because anytime I can help someone, I think it's really good. And I spend a lot of time before I do a reading for someone. I spend a good 30, 40 minutes charting their cycles, and I keep detailed things. Again, the Nadi astrology is phenomenal. See, Nadi astrology looks like this, and you can get time cycles. Of course, this is an individual. I don't want to put anybody else's chart up here. Well, here I can put up Chakrapani, because he's passed away. This is Chakrapani's chart, and he was very well known. He was kind of called the father of Vedic astrology in America, which, is an interesting title, because Vedic astrology is thousands of years old. But he exited the body precisely. He died in 2017, and he actually passed on in October 28th of 2017. And he had Ketu, the moon south node, right over his, see, this is the birth chart right here, right over his birth Saturn, precisely. And he had the north node, the eclipse point of the moon, over Jupiter.
Wow.
And he had Saturn transiting the moon. That's called Sati Sate. So again, people always say to me, what do you think is going on this planet? And I'll tell you, if we ever get an axis tip, I think it's going to change it'll either lengthen or shorten longevity on this planet. There's no question in my mind, because I think the cycles, we hear in the Bible, well, people used to live 700, 900 years old. Moses was this old, so, and we hear this in some of these ancient cultures where certain individuals had lived far beyond what any of us are living now, and productively living. They weren't just, making it with a cane. They were productive to hundreds of years old. And, modern science will tell us, well, that's pretty impossible. Well, it is under these conditions. What if all the energy comes out of the sun? The sun is the seed. If you change the angularity of this earth and the angularity of this moon, you will change a lot of things on this planet. And there's also the interesting phenomena that we are rocketing at about 500 million miles an hour around this central sun. Why we hear there was the Iron Age, the 2000 years of Aries, the Tarian age, which is the age of the bull, right? And then you go back. This is 2, 4, 6,000 years back. We were actually almost 8,000 years back. We're in the progressions of Gemini, depending on where we are. See, we've been in Pisces for just about the last 1900 years. So it's been a while, actually almost getting close to 2000 years. So it's pretty interesting stuff. And you look at if things will shift here, I think, when the batch of souls that have been purifying and rectifying here finally gets completed. And then who knows what'll be coming in on this planet. One thing's for sure, we don't have control of it.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for taking the time to be on the show today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome, my friend. It was fun. There we go. Go back to reality here. So, yeah. All right.